The American Civil War was anything but civil, a conflict that tore a nation apart, not just between the North and South, but between the darkness inside men themselves. While soldiers fought for freedom and ideals, there were others who used the chaos as an excuse for vengeance. Men who murdered neighbors under the veil of war, who burned farms and robbed the weak. Among the thunder of cannons and screams of dying men, there were stories that defied reason, and history tried to forget them. Buried within the yellowed letters of Union and Confederate soldiers, historians found something more than battle. Reports, strange accounts of inhuman creatures wandering through the fog-covered woods where many battles took place. At first, readers assumed these were references to guerrilla fighters, but as the details surfaced, it became clear these soldiers weren't talking about men at all. They spoke of massive hair-covered humanoids lurking in the Appalachian forests, creatures without uniforms or weapons moving silently among the trees. The men called them wild men, man-beasts, or simply monsters, beings with enormous feet and an almost human intelligence hiding behind savage eyes. In letter after letter, the same question appeared. What did we see out there? The mist that shrouded those battlefields wasn't just smoke from gunfire. It was something else. A veil between reality and nightmare. A thin curtain separating the known world from something ancient. Something that watched both armies kill each other from the shadows. These stories were dismissed for decades, brushed aside as fear-born hallucinations or the madness of war. But the records exist, the letters are real, and within them lies one of the earliest documented encounters of something the world would later call Bigfoot. Low radio hum. This is where it begins. In the forests of Virginia, 1863, under the cold glow of a half-moon, where two Union soldiers would soon learn that the enemy wasn't always human. Archive record, February 1863, Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The winter was colder than memory itself. The Potomac River had turned to glass, and the hills surrounding Harper's Ferry echoed with the hollow cry of wind. For the Union Army, the war had already become a machine that devoured men and mercy alike. But for two soldiers, Private James, Moore and Corporal Ramsey, that February night would mark the beginning of something far stranger than any battle. They were assigned to a routine guard shift near a supply train that would soon depart for the front lines. A quiet post, dull but safe, or so it seemed. The night air bit through their uniforms as they paced the rails, boots crunching against frozen gravel. The town slept under a silver fog, the kind that hides more than it reveals. Then came the shouting. From the garrison behind them, men yelling, rifles cracking through the still air. Someone screamed, "The beast's out there!" Moore and Ramsey froze. The echo of panic rolled across the camp. Within moments, officers were questioning witnesses. Men swore they'd seen a figure raiding the food stores. It climbed the wall like an animal, they said. 8 feet tall, covered head to toe in dark hair. Its eyes burning red when the lantern light struck. One soldier whispered, "The devil himself walks tonight." Moore wrote of it later, in a letter to his wife. A letter historians would uncover more than a century later. Very cold, still night. The boys raised a ruckus from the garrison. They swear a man-beast came from the river, rifle fire towards the cliffs, but nothing fell. Corporal says the devil raided the food stores. Covered in hair, tall as 2 men, vanished before our eyes. That letter, dated February 26, 1863, would become one of the oldest written accounts of a Bigfoot-like creature in American history. But the rest of Moore's writings were never found. The remaining pages, the ones that might have told what really happened next, were lost in a house fire decades later. Still, one detail has always haunted researchers. Harper's Ferry sits directly along the Appalachian Trail, a stretch of wilderness tied to hundreds of unexplained vanishings and sightings of towering human-like beings. Coincidence or connection? As the firelight faded that night, Moore and Ramsey continued their lonely watch along the railway. Neither spoke much after the commotion, but both men, it said, heard heavy footsteps from the tree line. Slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to any man. Fade in. Old paper texture. Typewriter sound. For more than a century, the letter written by Private James Moore lay forgotten, buried in a box of decaying correspondence, traded from one collector to another. Then, in 1999, it surfaced at a small auction in Pennsylvania. Among love letters and casualty reports, there it was. A single page signed, "Yours in haste, James Moore, 67th Pennsylvania." But what caught everyone's attention wasn't the handwriting. It was the content. One appraiser, while preparing the auction pamphlet, read Moore's chilling account of the man-beast of Harper's Ferry. He made a copy for himself. A decision that would keep the story alive. When the original manuscript vanished once again, when the buyer of the letter disappeared from record, all hope of verifying it seemed lost. Then tragedy struck. In 2005, the appraiser's home burned down. The copy of Moore's letter destroyed in the flames. Only fragments of the typed transcript survived in an old magazine column published years earlier. The article began simply, "The soldier wrote of a creature in the fog, a man not of flesh and bone, but of nightmare." Researchers later connected the location to the Appalachian Mountains, a region already famous for strange disappearances and whispered legends. It's where the folklore of Sasquatch, the wood devils, and the wild men first began to intertwine with American history. Could it be that Moore's man-beast was an early witness account of what we now call Bigfoot? Or was it something else entirely? A man driven feral by the horrors of war, his humanity stripped away by madness and isolation? Whatever the truth, Moore's story wasn't alone. Across the battlefields of Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, similar reports appeared. Soldiers from both sides writing of screams in the night, heavy breathing outside tents, and monstrous silhouettes watching from the trees. One of those letters came from a Confederate officer, a man named Captain George Anderson of Alabama. In 1890, long after the war had ended, his account was printed in the Pittsburgh Dispatch. It told of missing soldiers and a predator that hunted them in silence. Static noise. Record of 1890, newspaper clipping fades in. They called it the Wild Man of Cumberland Mountain. That's where the next chapter begins, in the heart of the Appalachian wilderness, where war met something far older than man. Fade out, sound of crackling fire and distant thunder. Archive footage, Confederate field log, September 1863. By the autumn of 1863, the war had dragged into its third year. The land itself seemed tired, hills stripped bare by cannon fire, forests haunted by silence. Captain George Anderson, a Confederate officer under General Braxton Bragg, led a small company stationed near the Cumberland Mountains, close to the Alabama-Tennessee line. Their orders were simple: hold position, watch the Union's movements, and survive the long, sleepless nights. The men were restless. Rumors had begun to crawl through the camp. Whispers of something stalking their picket line. Anderson dismissed it as fear, until the first man vanished. His name was Andrew Mason, a seasoned soldier and one of Anderson's best. He was assigned to the night post under a large oak tree, near the mouth of a narrow ravine. When dawn broke, his rifle was found lying in the dirt, loaded, untouched, but Mason was gone. There were signs of a struggle, footprints in the mud, the earth torn apart as if by claws. Anderson believed Union scouts had taken him. He doubled the watch and placed another man at the same post. But by morning, he too had disappeared. Low, static, heartbeat sound. 2 nights, 2 men, no trace. The others grew afraid, muttering about ghosts and forest spirits. But Anderson refused to surrender to superstition. He replaced the guard again, this time with a strong, defiant young soldier named Thomas Brown. Before taking post, Brown laughed it off. "Sir, it'll take a whole army to drag me off that spot." By dawn, Brown was gone. His musket lay beneath the oak, barrel bent. Stock cracked, as if something enormous had wrenched it from his hands. That morning, Anderson stared at the weapon and felt something cold move in his chest. This wasn't desertion. Something was taking his men. That night, Anderson gathered 10 of his most trusted soldiers. They surrounded the oak tree in silence, rifles ready. A fire flickered in the distance, painting the forest in amber light. The night wind carried no sound, no birds, no insects, only breath. Then came a rustling from above. Branches shifted. A low growl echoed through the dark. And before anyone could react, something dropped from the tree. A massive figure colliding with the sentinel below. Anderson shouted, "Hold fire! Capture it alive!" Men rushed in, shouting, struggling, until the thing was finally pulled into the firelight. What they saw froze every man where he stood. A giant human-shaped but wrong, tangled hair, rags clinging to a scarred body, eyes wild with rage. It glared at them and let out a laugh. A sound so unnatural that one soldier dropped his rifle and fell to his knees. Fade out, echoing laughter in the dark. Captain George Anderson's log entry was written in a trembling hand. Half report, half confession. The first line read, "We captured something that night, but I cannot say it was a man." The wild man, as the soldiers called him, sat motionless beside the campfire. Mud and blood covered his body, his skin leathery and torn. His wrists were bound, but he made no attempt to flee. He only stared at the fire, unblinking, as if hypnotized by it. Anderson approached cautiously, revolver in hand. "Who are you? Speak." No reply, only breathing, slow, heavy, deliberate. When the light hit his face, Anderson froze. The man's features were half human, a heavy brow, scars across the jaw, and eyes that shimmered yellow in the dark. But there was intelligence there. Awareness. One of the younger soldiers, Private Ellis, whispered, "Sir, that ain't no deserter. That's something else." Moments later, the prisoner moved. He raised his head and muttered something, a sound like a mix of growl and words. Anderson leaned closer. At first it sounded like gibberish. Then slowly, syllables began to form, fragments of speech, old and broken. But no more fire, no more killing. The men exchanged horrified glances. It could talk. Anderson ordered the others to stand down. "Fetch him water," he said, "and keep the ropes tight." As dawn approached, the prisoner began to shake violently, eyes rolling back, body convulsing. Then, as if remembering something terrible, he screamed a single word. "Cumberland!" The cry echoed through the trees, startling the horses. Moments later, a distant answering howl rose from the forest. Deep, guttural, inhuman. The men froze. There was more than one. Anderson's report ends abruptly there. The next entry, written 2 days later, is fragmented, words trailing off the page. He wrote of hearing voices in the woods, of shapes moving just beyond the firelight, and then in a final scrawl barely legible, they were not animals. They were men who forgot how to be human. Static, audio distortion. In 1903, decades after the war, a prospector exploring the same mountain found remains near an old Confederate encampment, bones arranged in a circle, surrounded by charred wood and rusted rifle parts. Among them a single engraved tag, CPT George Anderson, 3rd Alabama. No record exists of his official death. Some say he deserted. Others believe he became part of what he was hunting. 3 months after Captain George, Anderson and his men vanished in the Cumberland Mountains. A Union scouting unit was dispatched to the same sector. Their mission, locate missing Confederate survivors, recover supplies, and clear the area for an upcoming offensive. The mission was led by Lieutenant Samuel H. Reeves, 24 years old, 5th Ohio Infantry, known for his precision and calm under pressure. What he wrote in his field journal, however, was anything but calm. December 19, 1863. The woods are silent here. Not a bird, not a whisper of wind. It feels as though the mountain itself is listening. Reeves and his patrol found what remained of the Confederate encampment. Rifles blackened by soot, tents shredded by claws, and bones laid carefully in a circle. At the center stood a charred oak tree, and something nailed to its trunk. It was a piece of uniform cloth, a Confederate gray, with a tag still intact. CPG Anderson. The men assumed the rebels had performed some kind of burial ritual, until they noticed the footprints. Massive, bare, and deep, circling the camp in patterns that made no sense. Whatever made them wasn't walking. It was dragging itself. Sound, static, low hum, heartbeat. That night, Reeves made camp nearby. His journal notes strange noises after sunset. Rocks clattering, trees swaying though there was no wind. Then at 2:43 a.m., his final entry. Something moves between the trees. Tall, hunched, naked of reason. The firelight makes it vanish when I stare straight at it. Private Miller swears he saw eyes. I heard breathing behind me. God forgive us. They never left this mountain. At dawn, only 3 men remained. Reeves was gone. His rifle lay beside the fire, barrel melted, as if gripped by unbearable heat. Weeks later, when Union reinforcements reached the area, they found no survivors, only scattered gear and a half-burned notebook. Inside, written in charcoal, was a single phrase repeated over and over. It wasn't the enemy. It was what the war woke up. Fade to black, sound of wind, plus distorted whispers. In the decades that followed, hunters and miners reported screams echoing from the ridges, long, human-like wails that rose and fell with the night wind. Locals began calling the place the Hollow of Lost Men. By 1900, the U.S. Geological Survey officially marked the area as unfit for habitation. Even today, maps show that section of the Cumberland blank. No roads, no towns, no trails. And according to the locals, if you stand on the ridge after dark, you can still hear a man calling out, "Hold the line, boys, hold the line." Decades later, the story of the Cumberland Mountains disappeared into local folklore, whispered warnings, passed down by generations. But in 2018, a researcher named Cameron Buckner uncovered a box of old Civil War letters and recordings in a dusty Alabama archive. Inside, faded manuscripts, charred envelopes, and a series of reel-to-reel tapes revealed accounts that no historian had ever fully cataloged. Buckner described the moment he first played the tapes. At first, it was just the sound of old wind through the trees. Then the voices started, shouting, screaming, and something else, something deep, guttural, almost intelligent. One tape labeled Anderson, Cumberland, 1863, contained Captain George Anderson's field recordings. The voices of soldiers were clear, trembling, calling out to missing men. But layered beneath them was another sound, low growls, dragging footsteps, and a rhythm that didn't match any human gait. The letters corroborated what Moore had written decades before. Soldiers reported humanoid figures, tall, wild, clothed in rags, with immense strength and uncanny intelligence. The descriptions were eerily consistent, from Harper's Ferry to the Cumberland Mountains. Union and Confederate alike spoke of the same creature. Buckner's team attempted to triangulate the locations mentioned in the letters. The Appalachian forests held another secret: natural caves, hidden ravines, and rock formations that perfectly matched the sightings. According to the tapes, some soldiers followed these creatures unsuccessfully. Others vanished without a trace. "You have to understand," Buckner said in an interview, "these weren't ghost stories or drunken hallucinations. These men were disciplined soldiers. They wrote everything down, and yet they couldn't explain what they saw." One particularly chilling recording captured a soldier muttering, I watched us sleep, waited, and laughed." The team cross-referenced the letters with historical archives. Every time a soldier disappeared, there were signs, claw marks, disturbed earth, unexplainable footprints far larger than human. Even centuries later, the Appalachian locals report similar sightings: tall figures in the mist, shuffling sounds at night, the occasional blood-curdling scream. Buckner concluded, the war ended long ago, but what these men encountered, perhaps it never truly left. The Cumberland Mountains had always been a place of secrets. Soldiers in the Civil War fought battles against men, but many came to realize that the forest itself was a different enemy, a living entity, patient, waiting, watching. By 1863, dozens of men had vanished in the mountains. Union and Confederate soldiers alike reported eerie phenomena: footsteps that didn't belong to humans, glowing eyes in the trees, shadows moving in impossible ways. Some swore they heard whispers of names, calling them deeper into the wilderness. Local legends spoke of the wild men, creatures who had lived in the Appalachians long before the war. Tall, savage, intelligent, part human, part beast. But the soldiers' letters added a terrifying detail. These beings were not just hiding. They were hunting, and sometimes they left their victims alive, only to vanish again into the fog. In one fragment from a Union soldier's diary, "We thought it was the enemy until we saw it leap over the ridge, taller than any man, with hair as black as the night, dragging something across the ground, and laughing." By winter, Harper's Ferry and surrounding towns had become ghost towns at night. Supply trains moved slower, guards doubled, but the disappearances continued. Anderson's men, Moore's patrols, and countless others vanished without a trace. What the soldiers had thought was madness was proving to be something real, ancient and unstoppable. Modern researchers revisiting these letters and recordings noticed a pattern. The creatures only appeared near rivers, ravines, and forests untouched by man, places where the natural world still held dominance, and wherever soldiers reported the disappearances. Later maps showed strange formations, circular clearings, deep pits, rocks marked as if by tools or claws. Cameron Buckner, while reviewing recovered tapes in 2018, noted something chilling. It's as if these creatures were watching history unfold. The war, the blood, the chaos, and learning from it. They weren't mindless. They were calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. Some historians dismissed these accounts as hallucinations, fear, or myth. But when the patterns matched geography, time, and multiple independent eyewitnesses, the question remained: what were these creatures, and why did they choose the Civil War to reveal themselves to humanity? Fade out, sound, distant howl, rustling leaves. The shadows of the forgotten war were not confined to history books. They lingered in the mountains, in letters, and in the fog, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek them. The moon barely pierced the dense fog that rolled over the Cumberland Ridge. A lone figure moved silently among the trees, Private Elias Turner, a Union soldier turned hunter, sent to investigate reports of missing men, armed with a rifle and a lantern. Turner's boots barely made a sound on the frost-covered ground. He had heard the stories, men disappearing, whispers in the dark, eyes glowing through the trees. He didn't believe in ghosts, but war had taught him that sometimes reality was stranger than any tale. "Keep your eyes open," his commanding officer had warned. "And whatever you do, do not follow the sounds." But Turner followed anyway. The first sound was subtle, a branch snapping far ahead. Then the soft shuffle of enormous feet on the frozen earth. He raised his lantern. Nothing. The fog swallowed the forest in ghostly gray. And then he saw it. A figure hunched and massive, its silhouette outlined against the dim light. Covered in matted hair, limbs too long for any human, it moved with uncanny speed. Turner froze. The hunter became the hunted. The creature's yellow eyes reflected the lantern's glow, intelligent, aware, calculating. Turner raised his rifle, but the creature did not flee. Instead, it crouched, observing, tilting its head like a predator studying prey. Then, as if making a decision, it sprinted, faster than any horse he had ever seen, across the ridge and vanished into the fog. Turner's heart pounded. He ran toward the spot, scanning every tree, every shadow. There he found something chilling. Footprints, gigantic, human-like yet distorted, circling a small clearing. In the center, a discarded Confederate belt buckle, charred at one edge. History and legend collided in that instant. The creature had been here before, during the war, observing, surviving, and perhaps learning. Suddenly, a low growl reverberated through the fog. Turner spun around. Eyes glowed from every shadow, multiple figures emerging silently from the trees. The ridge seemed alive, watching. The hunter was trapped, surrounded not by soldiers, but by something older than the mountains themselves. Turner never fired. He backed slowly, feeling their gaze follow him, until he vanished into the fog, alone, terrified and forever changed. Fade out, echoing growls wind through trees. The Cumberland Mountains had claimed yet another witness, and the legend of the wild men continued, unseen, unfathomable, and haunting anyone daring enough to enter their realm. By the winter of 1863, the Cumberland Mountains had become a place no soldier wished to enter. Union and Confederate alike whispered of missing patrols, vanishing scouts and the wild men, creatures lurking in the mist, patient, silent, and ever watchful. Private Elias Turner's disappearance was only the beginning. The few surviving letters and accounts spoke of shadows moving against the wind, glowing eyes peering from every ridge, and growls that followed men long after they had fled the forest. It was during one final reconnaissance mission that the full horror was revealed. Lieutenant Samuel Reeves and a small group of Union scouts pushed deep into a fog-laden ravine, searching for the remains of missing soldiers. At first the fog seemed ordinary, swirling mist over frozen streams. Then the sound came, heavy, deliberate footsteps, far too large to be human. "Steady, don't fire unless you see it," Reeves whispered. But the forest offered no warning. Eyes appeared in the fog, reflecting lantern light, dozens of them. The scouts froze as shapes moved, leaping from tree to tree with inhuman grace. Suddenly one of the men screamed. A creature had lunged from the darkness, its long arms wrapped around him, lifting him off the ground. The others opened fire, the rifles cracking, bullets tearing through branches. But the figure seemed unharmed. Its eyes, glowing yellow and intelligent, stared through them. Then more emerged, tall, savage, ancient hunters of the mountain, circling the remaining soldiers like predators. Reeves tried to retreat, but the fog had thickened, disorienting them. Screams echoed, shots fired blindly, but by dawn, only one soldier remained, shivering, broken, and silent. He later described what he had seen. They were men, and yet not men. Eyes that knew the world before the war, before men claimed these mountains. They watched. They learned. And they waited for the foolish to wander too far into their home. By 1864, the military abandoned the mountain's deeper reaches. Supply lines rerouted, patrols avoided the region, and reports of disappearances dwindled. But the local legends endured. Hollow whispers in the fog, footprints too large for humans, distant laughter echoing over the ridges. Modern researchers piecing together Moore's letters, Anderson's reports, and recovered tapes agree on one thing. The wild men of the Cumberland Mountains were not myths. They were witnesses, survivors and predators all at once. The war had awakened them, or perhaps revealed what had always been there. Fade out, wind howling, distant human-like screams. The fog rolls on, hiding secrets older than any army, any war, any history book. For those who dare enter the mountains, the echoes remain, and of men who fought, vanished, and were never truly alone. After decades of silence, modern explorers began mapping the Cumberland Mountains in the 21st century. They found caves, ravines, and hidden tunnels long abandoned by humans. Artifacts littered the ground, rusty rifles, tattered uniforms, and scraps of journals hinting at encounters that had never reached history books. One discovery changed everything. Deep in a cave near a forgotten ridge, researchers uncovered skeletal remains arranged unnaturally. Human bones mixed with large, unknown ones. Marks on the walls suggested tool use or claw scratches, and the floors were worn smooth, as if by generations of footsteps far larger than any human. Local legends called it the Hunter's Hollow. They spoke of creatures that had observed both Union and Confederate soldiers, sometimes intervening, sometimes disappearing, leaving only terror behind. Some claimed the wild men could communicate silently, conveying warnings or threats, but never fully revealing themselves. A recovered letter from Private James Moore mentioned a similar discovery in 1863. "We saw signs in the forest, footprints and markings no man could make. Something watched us as we marched, guiding the enemy or perhaps testing us." Modern researchers noted a disturbing pattern. All sightings, disappearances, and strange events clustered around these caves and ridges. The creatures had territories, vast, hidden, and seemingly untouched by time or war. One researcher, while documenting the caves, reported, "We heard breathing that wasn't ours, shadows moving against the rock, and faint whispers, almost like counting, or warning us. It felt alive, intelligent, waiting, and we realized we weren't the first to trespass here." The team theorized that during the Civil War, soldiers unknowingly wandered into ancient domains, and the wild men responded according to their own rules. Union scouts, Confederate patrols, and later hunters became part of the same legacy, victims or witnesses of a cryptid presence older than the mountains themselves. Even today, local hikers report strange noises at night, footsteps that vanish, glowing eyes in the mist, and an overwhelming feeling of being watched, studied, and judged. Some claim that the wild men know human history, responding only when humans cross into their hidden world. They are the forgotten observers of a war that shaped a nation, and perhaps a warning of what survives when men fight and nature watches. Fade out, echoing howls, dripping water. The Cumberland Mountains keep their secrets, buried beneath centuries of fog and foliage, and anyone who enters them now steps into a story older and darker than any history book, a place where man and monster have always collided. The fog had returned. For over 150 years, the Cumberland Mountains had swallowed stories, letters, and lives. Now modern-day researchers, armed with Moore's letters, Anderson's accounts, and recovered tapes, ventured deep into the Appalachian wilderness, chasing what history had almost erased. The team followed the old Union patrol routes and Confederate supply trails, tracing the exact locations of past disappearances. At the heart of a hidden ravine, they found a clearing, the same one described in multiple Civil War letters. The firelight revealed footprints, enormous and unmistakably non-human. Then came the sound, low, guttural breathing echoing from the fog, circling the team. "Keep your lights low. Stay together," whispered Cameron Buckner, the lead researcher. And then they saw them. Tall, wild, hair-covered figures emerged from the mist, eyes glowing like lanterns in the darkness. They moved with silent precision, circling the team, observing. It wasn't an attack. It was a confrontation. Buckner's recorder captured the moment. "We've tracked you for decades, watched your kind fight. Destroy." The voice was unhuman, yet unmistakably deliberate. The creatures were the same witnesses the soldiers had described, survivors of a world humans had forgotten. They had watched the Civil War unfold, learned from it, and survived, hidden from every history book. A researcher stepped forward, trembling. "We're not here to fight, only to understand." The largest creature, over 7 feet tall, approached. It paused. Then, with a guttural, almost human sigh, it turned and vanished into the fog. The team realized the truth. These were guardians of the forest, observers of mankind's bloodshed, and perhaps the last living witnesses to the war itself. The soldiers who had vanished, the wild men who had appeared in letters and tapes, and the mountains themselves, all were part of a story humanity was never meant to fully comprehend. When the team returned to civilization, they brought back tapes, journals, and photographs, fragments of a history never fully recorded. Yet even those who studied them agreed on one chilling conclusion. The wild men had not disappeared. They still roamed the Cumberland Mountains, waiting in the fog, unseen, unrecorded, and eternal. Fade out, distant howls, wind through trees, soft static. The fog rolls on, hiding the last truths of a war and creatures that defy explanation. And for anyone who dares to follow these stories, the echoes remain, whispers of men, monsters, and the mountains that never forget.